So you're using Wix and you want to create a custom form where you have different stages and buttons where you can navigate between the different stages of the form and finally allow a user to submit the form as they move back and forth between the different stages. Hi there, welcome back to the Wix Wiz. I'm Eitan, and today we're going to be talking about how to implement a custom form or wizard like this using a little bit of Velo code, a multi-state box, and a no-code custom form in Wix. So if you want to learn all about that and more, let's get started. Today, I've chosen to do the tutorial in the Wix Classic editor. That's because I also want to make it super beginner friendly, and I also want to do it in response to some feedback and questions that I've been getting in the comments as to why all the tutorials are recently in Wix Studio. So just to clarify, almost all the tutorials on the channel can be done in both editors, so Wix Classic or Wix Studio. And I choose to use Wix Studio because I think that that is the general direction that Wix is going in terms of its marketing and development. But I know that a lot of you are on Wix Classic, so I just want to kind of give a shout out to the people who are still on Wix Classic with this tutorial. And just to let you know that everything that I'm demonstrating here is also possible on Wix Studio, very much like the Wix Studio tutorials, where everything that I do there is also possible inside of Wix Classic. Today, I am starting out with a completely empty blank canvas website, and we are going to be building a multi-step form, also known as a wizard. So the user will have several different pages that they go through of the form, and once they complete it, they press a button to submit the form. We'll also try and add some different cool features that you might want in a form like this, but we'll discuss that as we move forward. As a principle, I'm going to try and do this in the most simple way possible. It is going to need some Velo code, but most of the form management and submission process is going to be using no-code solutions. If you wanted to further customize this and take it another level up, you could also choose to do this form completely with code, and I'll try and address that a little more at the end once we already get our form set up. To get started, I want to introduce the component which is going to be at the heart of this form, and that is the multi-state box. This is the element that is going to allow our form to have many different steps and essentially make it a wizard as opposed to just a one-page form. This is the component that's going to require a little Velo code to use, but once we get a hang of it, the rest should be pretty smooth sailing. So let's go ahead and look for the multi-state box over here inside of our Add Elements panel, right over here. And we can just use the search right up here and look for a multi-state box. And you can see that it popped up right over here. And I'm just going to give it a click. And it tells me that this, it gives me kind of like a warning that this requires code. Okay, so as opposed to in the past where they might have let you just add this element onto your site and then turn dev mode on later, now they're really just prompting me and telling me you have to turn on dev mode for this to work. So let's go ahead and turn on dev mode. We're going to need it later on anyways. Dev mode is essentially what allows us to add Velo code to our website. So here inside of Wix Classic, that's going to be up here on the upper left. We're just going to go ahead and click that and then click on Turn on Dev Mode right over here to turn Dev Mode on. If you are in Wix Studio, then you will find the code panel activation somewhere over here. It'll look like squiggly brackets, and from there you can turn on code mode. Now that we've enabled Velo code, so here we have the IDE. This is where we're going to be writing the code for our multi-state box, and we'll get to that in a moment. Hopefully, Wix will now allow us to add the multi-state box to our website. So let's go ahead and give this a search and just going to click again here on multi-state box to add it in. So there we go. I've added in a multi-state box. Let's go ahead and find it. No, I didn't. Let's try that again. Add elements, multi-state boxes. I guess I have to choose which specific multi-state box we want to add. And I'm just going to add in a blank one. We have some example ones over here. If you want to start with one of these pre-designed multi-state boxes, I'm just going to start with a blank one. Let's just go ahead and drag that in. I don't know why. Wix allows you to click and add some element and drag and add other elements. So yeah, if you don't manage to click to add, then you can just drag it in from the side menu. There we go. So we have our multi-state box here. And the way that this works is essentially it allows us to render multiple different UIs within the same space on our website. Each one of these different UIs is stored in a state. So you can see here on the upper left side of the multi-state box, we have a drop down and we can select different states. At the moment, I only have one state. And if we want to add in more states, we can go over here to manage states, click that, and we can go ahead and either add a new state like that, or we can duplicate an existing state like that. Okay, so add new state, duplicate state. And now if we go over here to our drop down, I'm going to close this and go over here to our drop down. So you can see that I have 3 different states. So 2 state, one with an uppercase, one with a lowercase, and a state 2. If I wanted to make this less confusing, I can go to manage my states and I can change the ID of a specific state. So if I change this here, for example, let's say I want it to be state 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to start here from the last one because we can't have any duplicate states. So I'm going to call this, let's say, stage 3 of my form. And then I'll call this stage 2. And I'll call this stage 1. Okay, so imagine we have a form with 3 stages. I generally recommend that you give more significant names to your stages. So at the moment, this form, I'm just doing it quite sporadically. We don't have a very clear goal for this form, but we know, let's say, for example, that the last stage is going to be the submission stage. So instead of calling it stage 3, we could, for example, call it, let's say, form submission. Okay, something along those lines. And then if stage 1 and stage 2 had very clear purposes, then you can also name them accordingly. If not, then you can just have a naming convention like I demonstrated. So stage 1, stage 2, form submission. And now our dropdown has adjusted accordingly. You can see here stage 1, stage 2, form submission. And to really demonstrate what's going on here, so let's go to stage 1. And I'm going to add in some text. Let's go ahead and add in text here. And let's say I add in here a heading 6. And I'm going to drag this here to the upper left of our multi-state box. And I'm going to write here stage 1. Okay, this is stage 1 of our form. I'm going to copy that, Control C. I'm going to go to stage 2, and you can see stage 2 is now blank. Okay, so it's already an indicator that we've moved to a different stage. And I'm just going to paste that right here. And let's call this, for example, stage 2. And last stage, so we can call this, whoops, and nope, don't need any help. Thank you. I'm going to paste this right over here, and let's just call this submission. Okay, like that. And now if I go ahead and I toggle between the 3 different stages here, so you can see that they're essentially changing, and each stage really, each state displays the UI that you put in that state and not the others. So this is what's going to facilitate our multi-step form. And we're going to allow users to move between those different states. And at the very end, they're going to submit their form. Now that we understand the basics of what a multi-state form is and how to set it up, you can go ahead and crack your knuckles and sit up straight because we're about to do some coding. What we need coding for is to allow us to move between the different states of the multi-state form. So what we're going to do is we are going to set up some buttons. So let's say if I go here to stage 1, I'm going to add an element, look for a button over here. And I'm just going to add in, let's say, this black button right over here. And this button is going to be a next button. I'm just going to write here next, just like that. And what we want to try and achieve now is that when the user clicks on this next button, it will change from stage 1 to stage 2. That's our goal. So in order to do that, let's head over here into our IDE. And here I'm going to get rid of all this commented out code, all the code with a double slash before we don't need. And we're going to be writing our code inside of this onReady function. And the first thing we're going to want to do is select our button. Before we do that, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to click on my button. And I want to change this ID over here so that I know what button it is. Because I might have multiple buttons on my page or in my form. And I don't want to get confused, and I want to be able to read my code and know which button it's. So I'm going to say, instead of button 1, I'm going to say next button. And I'm going to still have number 1 there because this is the next button inside of stage 1. And we might have another next button inside of stage 2. So let's go ahead and name it like that. And I also want to give a name to my multi-state box. So if I click on the multi-state box, you can see here that this actually has 2 IDs. So one ID for the general state box and another ID that indicates what current state I'm in. I'm in stage 1 at the moment. And I'm going to call this instead our form state box, just like that. Okay, form. So I know it's for my form and I know it's a state box. You can name it something else accordingly, as long as it's very clear what it is. So now that we've done that naming, we're going to want to add an on click for the button. So either we can write that out ourselves, or we can select the button right over here by clicking on it. And then if you go here to the panel of the event handlers, you can, you see here that you have on blur, on click, et cetera, et cetera. So different events that will happen for this button. And specifically, we want to tap into the on click event. So you can go ahead and just click right over here. You can also, if you want, experiment with this AI assistant. So if you go ahead and click on the AI assistant, you can essentially try and program it using AI to do certain things. So for example, I've actually haven't tried this tool before, but I think it's a cool opportunity to try it together with you. So for example, we can choose the action here on click. And we want to describe what the code should do. So for example, I want it to move to the next state in my multi-state box. Okay, that's what we want our code to do now. When we click on the button, it should move into the next state on the multi-state box. I'm going to go ahead and click Generate Code. And let's see what it comes up with. I'm guessing it'll be something kind of generic. Yeah. So here, this is exactly the code that we were going to implement. The only thing that we're going to need to do is that we're going to need to switch out the IDs. So if you take a look over here, so this, my state box, that's not what we called our multi-state box. So that's going to need to change. And state 2 is also not what we called our second state. So that's going to need to change as well. But otherwise, we're generally going to be using this code snippet. So if you want, you can go ahead and even just copy this code snippet right over here and take it and just get rid of this right over here. Go into your onReady and put that right over there. Now, all we need to do is make the changes that I said. So this is going to be changed to form state box, change state. And here, instead of state 2, it's going to be stage 2, because that's what we named that's the ID of our second state. So if we go ahead and close this up now, and we go over here to test site, and I don't want to test on a test site. I actually prefer to use preview mode at the moment because it's a rather simple demonstration that we need to do here. And once we're in preview mode, hopefully once we click on this next button right over here, it will go over to stage 2. So that is the principle behind the navigation between the different stages in the multi-state box. I told you it wasn't too complicated. I hope you agree, especially with the help of the AI tool over there. And now what we're going to do is we're going to explore how to implement this for the rest of the stages and also talk about what a back button might look like and scaling this solution might look like. Now that we have our first next button down pat, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to replicate this for our stage 2. So I'm just going to copy this next button right over here. I'm going to navigate to stage 2 in the multi-state box, and I'm going to put our next button here using paste. And here, inside the next stage of the form, we need to make a decision. And this will depend on your project, what you're trying to achieve, and what you would want to allow your users to do. But it's possible that you may want to allow them to go back. Okay, so if they get to stage 2 and they decide they want to go back to stage 1, you might want to provide a back button over here. So if I just go ahead and paste another button here, and instead of having it say next, it will instead say back. Okay, you might decide that you want to change the design of this button a little bit. So make it something, a little more discreet or something like that, just to differentiate it from the next button. But essentially, this is the experience that we might want to give our users. So let's go ahead and set that up. So I'm going to go ahead and name each of these. So this is going to be our next button. So I'm going to zoom in over here, next button. And this is next button 2, not next button 1, because we're on stage 2. And this one is back button. So here we need to decide if we want to call this back button 1 or back button 2. Depends on what kind of naming convention you want to do. So let's name it back button 2. So we know that it's on stage 2, even though we don't have a back button on stage 1. Again, this is not set in stone. This is something that you can decide based on how you want to do the naming convention. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to call this back button 2, just like that. And now essentially we want to replicate this code that we have over here inside of our IDE for all of our new buttons. So let's start off by copying and pasting the code and just changing things so that they match the new buttons and stages that we want to navigate through. So if I go ahead and I just copy and I paste this twice, then over here, so when we click next button 2, we want to navigate to form submission, right? That's what we want to navigate to. So form submission. Or if we wanted to, we could also take this opportunity to add a third stage to our form. And so, for example, if we wanted to be efficient, we could go ahead and go to manage states. We could duplicate stage 2. And here you see it automatically named it stage 3. And it also already has our next and back buttons. So this is one way to create some consistency. I'll talk about another approach that we can take for the navigation between the states that can also provide a little more consistency and less double work. We always want to minimize double work. So here, now we have stage 3. I'm just going to change the title over here. And down here in our code, so now we can navigate to stage 3, let's say, instead of the form submission. I just want to show you how it would look if there were several stages, as opposed to just 2 stages. And here inside of next button 1, okay, so instead of next button 1, we're going to want to make this be for our back button. So we'll change this here to say back button, and we don't have a back button 1, but we do have a back button 2. And back button 2 will need to go to stage 1, right? Because if we click back from stage 2, we're going to go to stage 1. And then theoretically, we can go ahead and do the same thing for stage 3. So let's say we rename this to next button 3, and we rename this to back button 3. And then we can go ahead and copy paste these two, just like that, and change this to 3, and change this to 3. And then, so when we click on next button 3, this will go to form submission, and this will go to stage 2. So this will work. So if we go to preview mode, then we should be able to navigate from stage 1 to 2 to 3 to form submission and also go back. So like if we go next to stage 2 and we click back, it goes back to stage 1. Okay, if we go to stage 3 and go back, it'll go to stage 2. Okay, you also don't have to go directly back to the previous stage. If you wanted people to be able to jump between different stages, then you could also do that. The thing is that it becomes a little cumbersome and it becomes, quite repetitive in terms of our code. So here for 3 stages, I would say it's like not terrible. It's obviously not elegant, senior dev code, but it's not the end of the world if you just need a quick solution for your website. If you had a form with, let's say, 10 different stages, this could already start to become a little long and also just create inefficiencies if you wanted to make slight changes to how your form navigates between the different stages. So what I want to do now is discuss a few different ways that we can possibly make this a little more efficient so that we have less code doing more things. The first approach I want to explore is using arrays and for each loops in order to loop between the different buttons and essentially apply the same logic to multiple different buttons. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create an array up here on top. I'm going to call this const. And this is going to be, let's say, our next buttons. And here I'm going to put the differentiating identifier between our different buttons. So all of our buttons, we name the same thing. So we called them next button 1, next button 2. So really the only difference here is 1, 2, 3, etc. So here inside of the array, I'm going to have here 1 and 2. And do we have a next button 3? Yeah, we have a next button 3. So I'm going to put here 3. And I'm going to do something similar for our back button. So let me just copy this, paste it, change next to say back. And here in the back buttons, we don't have a 1. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this 1. We only have a 2 and a 3. Okay. And now here inside of our onReady, instead of all of this code that we have here, what I'm going to do up here on top is I'm going to loop between this through this array. So I'm going to say here that next buttons dot for each, and let's say here button index. Okay, that's the number that we have in here. And we're going to run a function for each one of those. What function are we going to run? Essentially, we're going to select the form state box. We're going to say change state. And here, the state that we change to is going to depend on what that index is. So we're going to use something called a template literal. And these are 2 backticks, not single quotation marks. It's 2 backticks. And here we're going to have stage. And now we're going to want to use a variable, okay, just like that, in order to put in our stage that we want to go to. And for the next button, the stage we want to go to is always 1 more than the button index. So it's here, we're going to have button index plus 1. Okay, so this is all good. But I'm going to point out in a moment a little issue that we might have here and how to solve it. But let's first do the same thing for our back button. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this, paste it right over here, change this to back buttons. And the only difference that we're going to have here, whoops, I accidentally got buttons twice there. The only difference here is that instead of going to the next stage, so button index plus 1, we're going to go to button index minus 1 because we want to go back. Now, why is that not giving me a problem? Must be type any number. Okay. I don't think this will be a problem because I think it'll coerce it into a number when we actually have the minus here. But if we want to be extra safe, what we could do is we can wrap this here inside of something like this number, just like that. And that will guarantee that the button index is a number, or we could have numbers here in the array. This is where some people might get excited and some people might get scared or frustrated. because coding is a very flexible thing. Isn't one solution for every problem, and that could be fun, but it could also be confusing. So I'm just going to go over here, and this will guarantee that these are numbers. And again, this might not be necessary based on what your naming convention is. The potential issue that we might have here is that, for example, one of the stages is not called stage something, it's called form submission, right? One of the states of our multi-state box. So either we can rename this to, let's say, stage 4 with the convenience of our code in mind, or we could just add a simple condition here. So for example, over here, we can say if button index equals to 3, so like it's the last button, or we can say that button index equals, or the current index of this for each is equal to the last index of the array. Again, multiple ways that we can do this, but essentially we need to identify that this is the last stage. This is the last item in the array, because we're not going to have a back button from our form submission page. We're not going to have a next button from our form submission page. We'll have some other kind of button, which we'll talk about soon. And then we can open up curly brackets here. And then we can, instead of having the change state be to this, we can just change this to say form submission. Submission, like that. And then we'll just have here an else statement and put this inside. So essentially we created a condition based on where we are in the form. And this is for the last stage, but there might be other scenarios where you want to do something like this as well. So I'm just showing you what this might look like. Now that we have our new solution here, I'm going to go ahead and comment out all this code. And we can go ahead and preview in order to test this out. So I'm going to go ahead and click preview. And let's see if this still works. So here I started out in stage 2. By the way, your multi-state form box should always start. It should always start in the stage that you have over here. I'm not sure why it started here in stage 2 for me. Maybe that's because where I left it off last time. I would have to look into that, but it should always start from where you leave it in the editor before you publish your site. But here we are in stage 2, so let's just try and go ahead. Okay, so my back and next buttons are not working. So that means that we have a bug, which is very fun. So let's go ahead and see what that bug might be. I don't see any errors here inside of the developer console. So that indicates that we might need to publish to a test site in order to identify this bug, if I can't figure it out just by looking at the code. So let's see over here. Okay, I don't see any errors that are popping up. I don't see any crazy logic issues here for each button index, change the state, stage. Okay. I know what my problem is. It's not a bug. It's that I forgot a key part of the logic of setting this up. So great. And that's also why we started out in stage 2. So basically what I did is I ran the loop for, to change the states, but I didn't make it conditional on clicking a button. Okay, like we did here. So here we did, when a button is clicked, do something. Here, for those of you who are astute, you may have noticed this as I was coding, but I didn't actually put the button clicks in. Oops. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go ahead here, and in the line under the for each over here, I'm just going to select a button. And here also, we're going to have a variable. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select next button. And the button that we are doing this for is going to be the button index. So that means it'll be next button 1 the first time the loop runs. It'll be next button 2 the next time the loop runs. It'll be next button 3 the next time the loop runs. So that's this. And then we just add in here the on click. And we need to move all this code over here inside this right there. Okay, and then we just need to do something very similar here for the back buttons. So I'm going to select, and we're going to have a template literal. We're going to have back button, and we're going to, again, have it based on the button index. And then we're going to have dot on click. And we're going to have the change state over there. Okay, so yeah, that should deal with the problem. Let's go ahead and test it out in preview mode. And let's see if this is working. So we're in stage 1, which is a very good sign. I'm going to go ahead and click next. There we go. We're in stage 2, stage 3, and the back buttons seem to be working as well. Let's make sure our condition works. So if I click next on the stage 3, it went to stage 4, to form submission. So all that is working great. I'm leaving in my little blunders in the video. I know I get mixed feedback as to if people find it confusing or find it good that that I leave in these kinds of things. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Generally, I think that as embarrassing as it is for me to miss out on something so basic, I think that generally it is helpful to see thought process and coding in real life, and that's how it is. Sometimes you forget things. So that's number 1. And number 2 is if we take a look and we compare between the code that we have now and the code that we had before, at the moment, it's just about the same in terms of lines. So I don't, in this implementation, this might not seem like we actually, saved a lot in terms of lines of code. But what we did do is we created a scalable solution. So if previously for each new next button and back button, we would need to add in, 6 lines of code. Now, all we have to do is add in more numbers here into our array. Okay, this code is working on autopilot. We might need to change the button index for the last one here, also because I didn't build that in such a scalable way to begin with, but that could be improved. But generally, this code is now scalable code. So it's the amount of lines of code that I have here is not going to grow, even no matter how many stages I add into this form, into this multi-step form. So if you are not sure how many stages you're going to have, you want to plan for the future, or you really do have a lot of stages, then refactoring to something like this might make a little more sense. Another advantage that this has is that essentially here we're running a similar function for the navigation between each step. So for example, if we even wanted to add in a short animation in between each step, or a message, or anything that would happen for every single step, we could easily do that by adding 1 line or 2 lines of code over here, instead of needing to go in and change every single one of these on clicks. Okay, so I hope I sold you on my second solution here. Again, depending on the complexity of your project and your skill level, you might want to do something like this instead. I want to now take a moment before we move on to actually building out the form, which is pretty much just a regular custom form from now on. I want to discuss one other possible solution for creating a slightly more scalable navigation for our multi-state box. Even though we optimized our code for this current solution, there is still a small inefficiency with regard to how we planned out the UI. The thing is that each stage essentially has a next and back button. Stage 1 has only a next button, but each one of the other stages also has next and back. And this requires us to either duplicate the stages or add next and back buttons to every single stage. And when we add more stages, this could just add in more complexity. What we can do alternatively is, instead of having the next and back button inside of the multi-state box, we can have it outside of the multi-state box. So if I select here my next and back button, I'm just going to go ahead and copy that and paste it right, not like that, and paste it right over here. Let's try this again. There we go. Okay, so now you can see here that we have a next and back button that are sitting outside of the multi-state box. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change their colors just so you can really see that there are two different ones here. So this is the next that's outside, and this is the back that's outside. So let's go ahead and change that color a little bit. Okay, so now we have two different next and back buttons. One is inside the form, or not inside the form, but inside the multi-state box, and one is on the outside. And what I want to try and do now is to set up a logic so that we only have one set of buttons that handles all the navigation for our form. So that if we click next, it will move to the next stage depending on what our current stage is. And if we click back, it'll move back depending on what our current stage is, instead of having individual buttons on each stage that control that navigation. Let's hop in and get our hands dirty with trying to implement this new approach. So first thing, let's do the easy thing that we know we need to do, which is to name our buttons. So I'm going to change this button over here to be just next button. And here we don't need to do any numbering because there's only going to be one next button for our entire form. The same goes for the back button. So I'm just going to select it and change this here to be back button. Now let's go into our code. And what I'm going to do first thing here is I'm going to comment out all of our existing code so it doesn't conflict with the new code that we're going to write. And now essentially we're going to have two event listeners here. We're going to have one for our next button. So next button dot on click. And we're going to have another one for our back button. Back button dot on click. Okay, so this is all we should need to have, just these two. And what we need to do is we need to keep track of what stage we're in and what the next stage or previous stage should be. Okay, so in order to do this, we could either, again, there are multiple ways to approach it. We can create some kind of directory for our multi-state box to understand, what stage is what index. It could be that our multi-state box also provides this kind of index. We can easily research that if we go over here and we click on our multi-state box, and then we open up the Velo documentation, just like that. And if we take a look over here, then we can see here that we have, for example, current state. Okay, so this tells us what the state ID is. So for example, state 1 for the current state. What else could it tell us? It can also tell us a lot of things here about the current state. Parent, rendered, type. Okay, there's a lot going on here, but it can give us essentially the ID. And we also have a property for all the states. So if we go states, then it'll show us, again, I think this should be an array. Let's take a look here. Yeah, so it's an array of all of our different states. Okay, so let me just show you what these two things look like in an example in the code on our site. So if we go over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I'm going to go console.log, and I'm going to say here states, and we'll select our multi-state box, form state box dot states, and we'll also do console.log current state, and we will log our multi-state box form state box dot current state. Okay, so let's see what these two things look like inside our code, what we have access to. So let's go ahead and go into preview mode. And if we open up here the console, so we can see here, so these are my two logs, and we have states. So here we have stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, form submission, and we have the current state. Okay. So what we can do essentially based on this information is that when we click, for example, the next button, what we can do is we can say, okay, this is the current state. Go to the array of all of my states and find the state that matches this. Okay. My concern is that these might not actually be strings, but these might actually be objects. Okay, in terms of also in terms of the current state, these might be objects. So, for example, let me just show you what my concern is. So here, if we go to states, and for example, I say state0.id, and I say here current state.id, like that. Okay, and then we go back into preview mode. Then you can see here that we have states stage 1, current state stage 1. So this is actually the level that I want to use for the identification, but the principle is going to remain the same. Again, just to recap what we're going to try and do, if you feel like, whoa, this is getting way in over my head, you either skip forward a little bit to the implementation or skip to the actual implementation of the custom form if you're happy with the previous button setup that we did. But I think that this still can be useful for some people, so I'm going to try and dive in and implement it. So what we're going to do is we're essentially going to try and detect the current state. And then we're going to search inside of our states. We're going to find what index that is or for the current state. And then based on that, we can easily figure out, okay, what is the previous state or what is the next state? Because it'll just be the next item inside of the array. So let's go ahead and hop in and try and implement something like that. If you survive my previous explanation, then we're ready to implement the code for that solution. So let's go ahead and dive in here. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create an array to store all of the states of the multi-state box. So I'm just going to go over here. I'm going to say const, let's call it, let's say stages. And I'm going to say that that equals to our form state box dot states. Okay, just to make this a little more concise and reusable throughout our code. The next thing that we're going to do, I'm going to get rid of these two console logs over here. And we're going to start to implement the solution. So what we want to do when we click on the next button is we want to get the current state, right? So we're going to say const current. I'm going to call it stage because that's kind of my naming convention that I decided on for the different steps of the form. It might be stages, it might be steps. You might just use states or some other completely different thing. It's really up to you. And that's going to be equal to the current, to the form state box dot current state dot ID. So we're really drilling down to that specific ID. Now we want to find the stage that matches that current stage in terms of the index. So we're going to say const current stage index equals to stages dot. We're going to find index. And we're going to find it based on the fact that the item, so where the item dot ID is equal to current stage. Okay, if you want, you could also add your current stage ID, let's say, just to make it like a little more clear. But I think that this is good. So this is a method for finding an index in an array, which I hope I used correctly. I often mix those things up. but worst case, we'll get an error and then I'll fix it. So current stage index, awesome. And now since we are using a next button, we want to find, okay, what's the next stage? So we're going to say here, const next stage equals to stages. And here we're going to be using our current stage index plus 1. And then we're going to say here that the, let's say, dot ID. Okay, we're going to find the ID of the next stage. And based on that ID, what we're going to do is we're going to navigate to that stage. So we're going to say form submission dot change state not form submission, form state box dot change state. And we're going to change to this next stage, just like that. Okay, so I think that this should do the trick. Let's go ahead into preview mode and see if we got it right, or if we're in the right direction, or if we need to make some adjustments. So again, now I'm not going to use this next button here inside the form. I'm using this next button here that's outside of the form, okay, right here. And I'm going to give it a click, and you can see here that we went to stage 2. I'm going to give it another click, and we went to stage 3. Okay, so you can see here that this button is really acting in a very versatile manner, and we only have one button. Okay, so we don't need to have, and if we add more stages in, it'll work in exactly the same way. Okay, so let's go ahead and implement that for our back button as well. And the only thing that's really going to be different here for our back button is that here, instead of +1, it's going to be -1. So there's already a lot of potential here for refactoring and reusing this code over here, especially finding the current stage and the current stage index. But what I'm going to do for now is I'm just going to copy paste everything. And I'm going to change this here to -1. -1. Just like that. And we're going to go over here to preview mode. And hopefully our back button will be working as well. So back button, next, and then go back. There we go. Next, back. You can see here it's changing. Next, back. Awesome. Okay, so here, for example, we might want to do certain things for the UI, like we might want to disable the back button if there's no back, or we might want to disable the next button if there's no next stage, and we just want to have the form submission, etc. So those are things we can do, again, conditionally based on if there's a next stage or not. So for example, over here, what we can do is, first of all, we can start off with our back button disabled, okay? Because in stage 1, there isn't going to be a back. And then what we can do is we can, after we change to the next stage, we can check, for example, if there is another stage after that. Okay, so we can say here, for example, if if stages, I'm thinking on the fly here, if stages, current stage index, current stage index +2, then we will, so let's do it. Yeah, let's do it with an else if here. So if current stage, if current stage index +2, then we will enable the next button dot enable. And else we'll do next button dot disable. So I think that this should disable the next button when we get to the final page. Let's test it out. If it works, I'll explain what I did. If it doesn't work, then I won't explain to not confuse you. Let's go over here. So we'll click next, next, next. There we go. And the button got disabled here. Okay. So let me just explain what we did. So after we changed to the next stage, in that same breath, okay, we're also checking if another stage exists after the stage that we're moving to. So let's take the last stage, because that's probably the easiest to understand. So when we go from stage 3 to form submission, we're essentially checking if there is a stage. So current stage index is stage 3. Current stage index plus 1 is form submission. Current stage index plus 2 is there anything after form submission? If there is, then we would leave the next button enabled or enable it. If there is not, then we will disable it, which is what happened here. So now we could just add in this same logic over here for for the back button, but instead we would do here -2. Okay, so just a very similar relationship. Again, just more opportunity here for refactoring code. Um, Eventually, I would probably put this all as just one single function, and just with a slight difference to detect if we're going next and back, and change the plus here to a minus, something along those lines. So let's just check out that that's working. So if I go here next, okay, so it did not enable the back button, and that is because this needs to be changed. This is always the punishment for copying and pasting code. Back button, I still find it usually to be more efficient to like run into a small problem like this and make a change. That like we had next button instead of back button, so it didn't work, of course. So we go next, still not working. Let's see. Okay, so if we go to, let's see why it's not working now. So when we go to current stage, okay, so this isn't next stage. This should be previous stage. Well, let's leave it as next stage for now. I'm not gonna mess with that because that was working. Okay, stage is current index -2. So that means if we move, let's say, from stage, if we move from, 1 second. Okay, I know what my blunder is here. So let's get rid of this. Take a step back. So when we're navigating between the different stages and deciding if we want to enable or disable the next button, in the same breath, okay, it's not a matter of if we clicked next button or back button. Both buttons need to be evaluated in each stage, regardless of whether I navigated forward or backwards. So here, essentially, if if there are two stages going forward, then we're going to enable. So then that means over here, so again, copy paste it, and here within the same onClick. So this is going to be for the back button, and here we're going to have the -2. So the checking for enabling or disabling the back button needs to happen whether we're clicking next or whether we're clicking back. So I had to set it up for only when we click back. So obviously when I was clicking the next button, nothing was happening. And now we should be able to copy this exact same logic over here and put it here. And I'll show the refactoring stage because this is already getting way out of hand. But we'll do that in a moment once we make sure everything is working. So let's go ahead. We'll click here next. And it's still not working. Oh, there we go. So when I got to the last stage, it enabled the back button. Let's see. So I click next. It's stage 2, so it should enable the back button. So that means that here, I think this should be -1 instead of -2. And I'll test it out first, and so over here, just changing it to -1. We'll test it, and then let's see. So let's see. No, it should be, hmm. I guess if it's just current index, let's see. So if this, okay, so it seems like when we click the next button, we always want to enable the back button. Because if we're going to a next stage, then there's always going to be a back. Does that make sense? If we're going forward, there's always going to be a back. And the same thing, and if we're going back, then we're going to want to check if we're going back, we're going to want to check if there's a stage before the current stage. This is already getting quite complex. And then based on that, we'll say back button enable, back button disable, and we're always going to enable the next button. .enable. Because if we went back, there's definitely going to be forward. Let's see this one. This has to do with my ability to do abstractions. Let's see. Okay, so click next. Back button is enabled. Amazing. Let's click next till the end. Next button gets disabled. Amazing. Let's go back. Ah, so close. So we just need to get this back button to disable once we get to the last stage. So if stages, current stage index -1. Let's put in a log here. So we'll do console.log. Stages, current stage index -1. And we'll do here, is there previous stage? Let's do like that. That one .enable. So okay, let's take a look. 15 times the charm. Well, this is not going to fix anything, but it'll hopefully give us a little understanding as to, so let's go ahead and click next. Let's click the back button. Is there a previous stage? Stage 2. Okay. And let's click back again. So now we're in stage 1, but for some reason it's giving me the current stage. Oh, because the current stage index is the one that's 2 ahead of the previous. So we just need to change this to -2, just like the logic from before, and that should do the trick right over here. So I change this to -2, and we head into preview. And let's go ahead here and next, back is disabled. Amazing. Okay, we finally got that done. So I'm trying to decide now if I should refactor this code for you into a shared function or if we should move forward to actually building out the forms. I'm going to refactor it a bit, just because I feel like it's irresponsible to leave with such messy code. But what we're going to do is, if you want, you can go ahead and skip. I'll have chapters in the video at some point, and you can just skip forward if you're done. If you're done watching me mess around. So let's go ahead and refactor this a bit. So let's start by breaking this out into a few different functions. So one function that we have is, let's say, get current stage index. Okay, so let's do this over here. So we'll have function get current stage index. And that's going to be these 2 lines over here. So grab this, put that over here, and return current stage index. And then we can already go ahead over here and we can say const current stage index equals to, or we could even just say index equals to get current stage index. And that's all. Okay, so that's a bit of refactoring that we did over there. And then this here would be index, and this would be index. Just because contextually now I can understand the index is the current stage index because I have this function. So that saves us that. The next things are all going to be a little different between if we do next button or back button. So let's see how we can make this conditional. So let's go ahead and create another function. And we'll call it navigate to stage. And we'll pass in, let's say, an index. And we'll pass in, let's see, we'll pass in next stage, and we'll pass in if this is next or back. So direction. Okay. And then we'll have here, let's say we'll have a switch based on the direction. And we'll say if it's next, we'll do one thing. If it's back, we'll do another thing. And we're going to want to do all of this. Oh, hopefully you could see what I'm doing because I'm not even zoomed in. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to grab, I'm going to grab all of this. And I'm going to put it over here. And what we're going to want to do, so here, this +1 and this +2 is going to depend on the direction, right? So if it's next, then it's going to be positive. And if it's going to be back, it's going to be negative. So we just need a certain variable that will change it from positive to negative. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say const, let's say, we'll declare it outside of the switch. So we'll say here, let direction integer. I don't know if that's such a good name, but direction integer. Okay, let's say like that. And then here, if it's next, then we'll say direction integer equals to 1. And otherwise, we'll do -1 here. And that way, what we can do is we can say here that this always equals to index +1 times direction integer and +2 times direction integer. So, and then this will change the value of ± based on if we're going next or back. The next thing we need to deal with is which buttons to enable and disable. So basically what we have is if we're in the next button, then these two are going to be the back buttons, and this is going to be the next button. If we're in the next button, these two are going to be the next button, and this is going to be the back button. If we're in the back button, these two are the back button, and this one's going to be the next button. So basically, all we need to do is set up just some logic over here. So I'm going to change these into template literals. And for these two, it's going to be the same as the current direction, right? So these are going to be the same as the direction. And this is also going to be the same as the direction. Just like that. And for this one, it's going to be the opposite of the direction. So that means that it's going to be, we'll put like a slightly more complex condition in here. So we'll say direction equals to next, question mark, then it'll be back, and otherwise it will be next. something like that. And we might also be able to do something similar now that I think of it for the direction integer as well. Instead of doing this whole switch over here, what we can do is we could say, let's see. Here we can say, let's say, can have, let's say, direction equals to next 1 minus 1. I think that that's cleaner. It's already getting into, and get rid of all this. Yeah, I think that's better. If it works, it's better. Okay, so then what we're going to want to do here is navigate to next stage. So here we can say navigate to next stage, and we'll have here index and direction. So here it's going to be next. And we're going to we're going to have the same 2 lines of code over here. And this will be back. Okay, so that is a lot better. If it works, let's go ahead and try it out. So we'll go over here into preview mode. And let's see. So click next, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. Excellent. And our back button is working as well. And all of the disabling and enabling is working as well. So that's beautiful. Okay. So that is the alternative approach that I wanted to share with you of having the buttons outside of the multi-state box. You can pick and choose what works best for you. If you have a very generic navigation, then possibly having it outside the multi-state box would make more sense. If you have a lot of different custom permutations or design changes between each stage, and you really want the next previous experience to work very differently between different stages, then it's possible that either the very first or the second approach that we demonstrated would be the best. And with that, we are wrapping up the chapter of how to navigate between the different stages of the form. And what we're going to do now is just really wrap it up by showing the actual implementation of the different form inputs and the submission. Creating the actual form part of our multi-step form, again, is, I think, rather simple. And you can also reference my other tutorials about how to build custom forms to gain deeper understanding about this. But it works essentially the same as if you were building a one-page form, just your inputs will be spread out throughout the different stages. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to add in a collection. So if you haven't done yet, you can go over to the CMS and create a collection. And I'm just going to create, let's say, let's start from scratch. And I'll just call this example form, just like that. And we're going to go ahead and add in a few inputs, a few fields, sorry. So let's go ahead and add a field. Let's say I'll choose first name, just like that. And I'll add in another field for, let's say, last name. And I'll add in another number field, let's say, for age. And should we add in one more field? Let's add in one last field. Let's say website. Okay, somebody can give a URL to their website. Okay, so this is our form here. I'm just going to change the primary here to first name. I'll get rid of the title because I don't need that. And this is the data that we're going to collect in our multi-step form. Obviously, you can go ahead and add whatever different fields you need. And then we're going to add in our inputs. So here in stage 1, let's say we ask for their name. So I'm going to go ahead here and look for inputs. So here we have one input. So here is add your name. We can change this to be, let's say, first name. And copy that. So I'm just going to copy, paste. And here we're going to have last name. Awesome. So now that's stage 1 of the form, and we want them now to go to stage 2. So I'm going to go over here, stage 2, and I'm going to go and add in some more elements. So let's add in, what else do we want? We want to collect the age, right? So add another text field here, and I'll change this one to be a number. This one will be number, and we'll have here, add your age. Okay, so that's that step. And for step 3, we'll get the person's website. So let's go ahead and add in this input. And here we're going to say settings, add your website. And then here in the final stage of the form submission, I'm just going to add in one button here. Let's add in a button. We'll add in, let's say, a blue button like this. And here we'll just say submit. Okay, so now we have all of our inputs in. All that's, whoops, I guess this did not add to, it did not add it to the multi-state box. So let's go back and try that again. Form submission. I'll paste that right here, and I think it should be added. Now let's try again. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to connect all of these inputs to our to a data set that will submit the data as a form to the collection, essentially. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to connect to CMS. Okay, click when you select one of the inputs, you'll have this squiggly line right up here. And then here we're going to add in a data set. This data set is going to be connected to our example form collection. And it's going to be a write data set. So here you can see it starts off with mode read, and it has this big red exclamation point that's saying that there's something wrong. So we're going to go here into the data set settings. And here where it says data set mode, we're going to change this to write. By the way, if you wanted to create an editable form, then you would do read and write, but that is a little above the pay grade of this tutorial. So we're going to just do a write for now. And let's go ahead and go back here. And we're going to connect the value that this input connects to first name. So what that means essentially is that when somebody submits this form, it will take the input from first name and put it into that field inside of my CMS collection. We have one more warning over here. And I think that it probably has to do with the permissions of the collection. So a collection by default, when you create it in Wix, is a collection for viewing content, but we want people to be able to submit content. So we just need to make a little edit here to the collection. So instead of having it say show content, we're going to do this one, collect content, just like that. And who can add content? So for now, I'm going to choose everyone. And who can view this content, collaborators. This might change depending on who you want to be able to fill out your form. Just going to go ahead and save that. And we should be all ready to go. No more warnings and errors over here. So that's all good. And now we can just link up the rest of our inputs. So this is going to connect to last name. And then we can go to stage 2. And this one is going to connect to, this is going to be age. And we're going to go to stage 3. And this is going to connect to website. Okay, and then if you have more inputs, more fields, that's the drill. Just keep on going ahead and connecting those. And when you're all done, you can go over here to form submission, or even before you're done, you can do this at any point. And you're going to click on the button for submitting the form, connect to CMS. And here we're going to connect a click action. And the action is going to be submit. And we can also add in messages. So we can add in, let's say, a success message. And what we can do is we can add in, let's see, click on that again. We can add in a failure message just in case something goes wrong. Here you can see that we also have an option of what to happen when somebody successfully submits the form. So here you can stay on this page or go to another page. If you want, you can also have another stage of your here inside of the multi-state box. So let's say we go ahead and we add in a new state over here. So add a new state, and let's call this one after submission. And then here we'll have, let's say, some text. And we'll just say, you're all done. And we want to navigate to that after we've submitted the form. Okay, so after we've successfully submitted the form, then we want to, again, the text is not on the stage. You go here after submit, paste, make sure it's here. Yeah, okay. So what we're going to want to do is after you click submit form and the form is successfully submitted, it will go to this stage. I'll show you how to program that, but just be aware that this can create some conflicts with some of the methods that we described for the page navigation. Because here you have essentially an extra stage in your multi-state box that is not a stage that you want people to be able to go back and forth from. So that changes all the logic essentially. What you can do is instead of having this, you can say like after submission, collapse this multi-state box or something like that. There are many different options, but let me show you what this might look like. So let's go here to our form submission. And I'm going to rename this button submit form button. And then what we're going to do here is we are going to, let's go over here on the bottom, let's say. And we're going to select the submit form button. Submit form button. Forget about that. We're not going to be doing it through the button. We're going to do it through the dataset. My bad. So here we have the dataset settings. And let's call this dataset, let's say our example form dataset. And then here inside of our code, I'm sorry if I'm going a little fast now. It's just, this has been a very long tutorial. So we're going to say here, example form dataset dot on after save. And then here we can do whatever we want. So we can for example, say, form state box dot change state to after submission. I think that's what I called it. Let's just confirm. Form submission after submission. Okay. Great. Let's go ahead and publish our site finally. And let's see if this multi-state form that we set up works. So I'm going to go here to view site. And let's start filling out our form. So my name is Pam Beasley. And that next button doesn't work. Let's try this next button. That works because we disabled the code for a second I was a little shocked there, but no, we disabled the code for these buttons. Remember when we did the bottom buttons? So that's why that didn't work. Age, how old is she? I don't know. 28. Depends on the season. Next, bottom button, website. So let's just take the URL from this site. Just going to put it right over there. And I'm going to click next. And then let's go ahead and submit the form. And you're all done. Now, if we go back to our editor, then, and we go here to our databases, open up the collection, then we can see here the data that was submitted from our form. So Pam Beasley, I hope I spelled Beasley right, 28, and the website. Okay, so with that, we're going to wrap up. I promised you one more note about how to do this in an even more complex manner than I've demonstrated until now. So Now what I did is I demonstrated it using a no-code form. So essentially, the form part itself didn't require any code, if you notice. We added a little bit for like the after submission, but that's not a requirement. That's not necessary. Like technically, the whole form part with the inputs and the submission of the form, that required no code, just reminding you. All of the code was about navigation and different options for navigation within the form itself. You could technically also do the form itself with code. So you could use, Wix data APIs, and you can run, a save Wix data.save and use code to get all the data from all the different inputs and stuff like that. Another topic that we didn't really talk about so much is validation. Okay, you might want to go ahead and do some validation in each stage before you allow and enable the next button to go through. I would love to do that with you guys, but I really think that if anybody is still watching at this point, it's probably a miracle. So I do have other tutorials about validation, so you can go ahead and check those out and hopefully be able to integrate the two concepts together. And with that, we are going to wrap up for today. So just to recap, we talked first about multi-state boxes, what they are, how to create different states, and then the basics of navigating between those different states using Velo code. We then presented an option for making the navigation code more concise using arrays, and then further explored a different option for setting up the button outside of the multi-state box itself. Afterwards, we hopped into the actual implementation of the form, setting up different inputs inside of each stage, and then submitting the form at the very end. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you don't want to miss out on videos like this that come out every week, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I will see you next time. That's all for now. Thanks for watching. This tutorial may be over, but that doesn't mean that your journey has to end here. YouTube will have some recommendations up above in a moment for more videos, but don't get too distracted because my eyes are over here, and on the WixWiz website, we have a lot more resources for you to continue learning or get support for your business or project. We've got a blog, beginner courses, and a community forum where you can vent about Velo or post some tough questions like, why does my header have a mind of its own? On the website, you can also find my personal calendar to schedule a one-on-one and details about getting ongoing assistance from our team of Wix experts. I'll catch you later, and don't forget that every big feature was once a small bug.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.